Welcome to the Neijiaquan podcast. This is Isaac. This is episode 10. And this one we talk about Xiang from Robert W. Smith's book, Masters and Methods. We answer a Patreon member's question on how standing relates to martial arts. Just like to give a shout out to our Patreon members and thanks for supporting us, and thanks to everyone else who's been listening. Jess has started an online Bagua Circle walking guided practice series. The first session is available to everybody on our Patreon. Future ones will be for subscribers only, so you can check that out now. Um, and I am doing Zoom classes. I have a free one on Sundays that's just standing, and the other ones are more Xingyi based, how to practice Xingyi if you're trapped inside your room. People said they've been helpful for keeping their practice going. You don't have to know Xingyi to do them, by the way. And that's about it. Hope you enjoy the episode and take care.
Welcome back to the Neijiaquan podcast with Isaac and Jess. At this part in the biography, his training takes place in Taiwan, and he's learning from a couple of teachers there, particularly the famous master Xiang. And we've been looking at another book called Chinese Boxing by R.W. Smith that describes Master Hong and his training with some pretty cool details. Another thing that Robert Smith covers is the training with Master Hong. We took apart the 5 basic forms of Xingyi, which he had learned from Zhang Jinfeng. He said that practicing the first step, Pichen, splitting, and holding it for 3 breaths an hour a day would cause the qi to concentrate in one's fingers. I found it to be so. This is interesting because in our training of Xingyi, we would often stand in San Ti, the Pichen posture, and really spend some time there and do the breathing.
Yeah, the only difference is it was 9 breaths instead of 3, but same, it was the same thing. Hour a day,
So an hour a day, 9 breaths on each side, and that causes the qi to concentrate in one's fingers. I mean, what does he mean by that?
Getting the qi to concentrate in the fingers is about basically getting your mind, your intent to get your energy to move through your arm out to your fingertips. And so the practice of Santi is basically about getting your energy to condense into one place or concentrate into one place, because all the Xingyi techniques, what they're about is you get everything to condense to that single point in your hand right at the moment of contact, and then from there it kind of expands outward. So this ability to concentrate your intent or your mind or your qi or whatever you want to call it, or all of them, is essentially the metal element, right? This idea of everything kind of condensing and congealing together like like metal hardening kind of stuff. So that's the idea.
And so that seems to be, that's like one of the core trainings of Xingyi, is this holding this extended posture, breathing, standing in space until your legs burn, and then move to the other side and really concentrate in that sort of stillness.
Yeah, and if you're doing 3 breaths, that's probably holding it for no more than a minute and a half or something like that. If you're doing 9 breaths, you're holding it for 5 or 6 minutes before you move. So just how long are you going to hold that posture between each movement? You want to hold it at least 1 or 2, just to kind of, okay, I'm here, I'm relaxed, I'm stable, boom, I do the next one. So in that sense, it's like a mini dissolving practice, right? Each time you land, you go boom, head to foot, and then you do the next one. So how many breaths do you want to spend doing that moment of going through your body head to foot?
So branching off from that question, one of our Patreon subscribers asked the question, how does standing practice relate with combat? And I think when Xingyi, you train the standing posture Santi, that's a critical component of building fighting skill.
Well, it's what we refer to as the gaps, right? The practice of standing in Santi removes these gaps between your intent, your mind, and your body, right? So if there's a big gap, right, when you say, okay, move your hand, then there's a 2 or second gap between when you after you tell your hand to move and when it moves. If there's no gap, it's almost instant. It just happens, and that, as soon as you think it, your hand is there. What happens is the smaller that gap is in you, the bigger it seems in other people, right? So, and this is essentially what makes somebody better or worse in internal martial arts, is how big is the gap between when you see something happening and you think, I want to do X, Y, or Z, and that movement actually takes place, right? So Xing Yi, right? The Xing is the body and Yi is the mind, and the whole idea is that those two things are one. So in that moment of I want to do something, you're already doing it, and that standing is the method for which you kind of join those two things. So Bruce would always say that Wang Shu Jing's, he would talk about things gelling, right? Like two mushy things coming together. It's also the classic, mind, body, spirit idea is all, wrapped up into that same idea that, after you do the training for a while, you become integrated in a way. Go ahead.
I was just going to reiterate that, you're standing still doesn't seem like a very combative thing to do. But as you stand and hold a posture, your mind and your body are weaving together to make your reactions faster, to make your movements quicker. So paradoxically, standing still is
you don't even have
to build up your speed.
It's not even quicker in terms of, point A to point B speed. It's quicker in terms of, someone else could be faster in terms of going from point A to point B. But if it takes twice as long for their brain to send the message to their hand, then you can move half the speed that they're moving and still get there first, right? And so this is a lot of where this idea of, there's different kinds of speed. There's speed from touch. There's speed from point A to point B. There's the speed at which you can change internally, right? And all of those things are based on this idea that you have, this integrated mind body. It's not a metaphorical who-we do-we thing. It's like, that's literally what you're trying to do. It's like, if you tell your finger to move, it moves. It doesn't wait, for half a second to move. It just does it at that moment, and those gaps, you can feel them, at first when you're doing some kind of two-person practice, because you'll blink, you'll stop, you'll kind of throw your head back, but you won't move your feet, or you'll move your upper body, but you won't move your lower body, or you'll move your lower body, but you won't, move your upper body. And so you create this kind of a wave, a disconnect, right? And all of those things are, these gaps in your intent and in your body. And that's like the reason Xing Yi does so much standing, and the reason standing is such a good thing for Qigong, is because it makes that link. And then once you have that link, it's like not all the doors, but many of the doors are now open to you that weren't open to you previously. Otherwise known as, Gong Fu, right? Skill. You now have internal Gong Fu. You have that thing which cannot be described other than, it's just there. It's that amorphous it that martial artists always talk about, someone's either got it or they don't, but nobody can really say what it is. It's just there when it's there, and it's in Xing Yi, the it is that ability to connect your mind to your body.
So Mr. Smith goes on to talk about his training with Hung Xiang some more. We worked on a form of sticking hands similar to Tai Chi's pushing hands, and did considerable unrehearsed close fighting. We pulled our punches, otherwise I would not have continued long. This was done by breaking the power at the wrist and slapping with the fist, which could still shake a person. I found him fairly up.
Well, that's that characteristic piece about, to me, that's the signature practice of that school, is everything is, in a sense, transmitted through just getting slapped around. It's like, So doing Rosho is how they make the, like how you get the feeling of it,
So Rosho is similar to Tai Chi push hands, where you circle each other's arms back and forth, but it includes striking and slapping just without full power. You break the power at the wrist so you don't
Yeah.
do all your damage.
It's I mean, it has a very, not similar. It has the same function as push hands has in Tai Chi, where you're learning how to apply all the internal stuff sort of at the moment of contact, right? So it takes away the piece about what do you do before you touch the other person, because that's a big one. And it just starts from the point of, okay, now we're touching, what happens now? And that's applying the techniques. And so Xingyi doesn't, I think that's sort of the Bagua influence too. When you add more, Xingyi would do more of the thing of, you do a technique 10 times, I do a technique 10 times, you do a technique 10 times, I do it. That's kind of their back and forth. Or something like Ansen Power, you do a set movement to learn how to move back and forth. The Rosho thing, I really think, is more from the Bagua system, stuff. And it's a great, just the way push hands is a way of transmitting a kind of body movement. Rosho is essentially the same thing, that you're imparting the feeling of how to move, how to get hit, how to hit in this, two-person activity, which, is I think the internal martial art version of sparring in a sense. We don't spar for the, "Ooh, I got you." It's like you might spar for a while till it's you're comfortable with it, but most of the training is done more in these sort of two-person interactions. It's just.
So that brings up the next point that he talks about. He says during this sticking hands, I found Hung fairly slow and relatively easy to score on. However, the key element was missing: power. He had enormous power in a static position. And when this was complemented by his body weight in motion, one can see and feel his credentials as a fighter were bona fide. So Smith was able to tag him with little shots that didn't do much. But then when Master Hong retaliated, he put his body weight behind each strike and could hammer him with power, basically.
So I once asked Bruce what, essentially, I think I was asking about Wang Jing, but it was the same kind of thing of, is the goal of all the power training to make it so that when the other person hits you, it doesn't do anything, right? I'm paraphrasing. And he said, yeah, it's essentially like if you get to that point where everybody that's hitting you is like a 3-year-old hitting an adult. It's like, what do you care if they tap you? It's not going to do anything. And then when you hit them, they're going to, be unconscious. And so, I think both of those guys had that thing of, just because you touch me doesn't mean you hurt me, and that's a real advantage in fighting, right? If you can take a blow from the other guy and doesn't do anything, it's like, oh, that's over real quick. And you can see
that's
it.
That's a nice thing to have. And I think,
No, go
ahead. In our work in Rosho together, I've just one of the key things is at first, when you try to tap somebody with a little quick strike, you can often get that, but there's nothing behind it. So the speed of your hand isn't quite as important as the slower, more body connected slap or hit that gets delivered by somebody who's fully connected and fully engaged. That might feel slower, but on contact, it carries way more authority.
Again, it's that thing about what kind of speed are you talking about, right? I mean, Hung Xiang was known for his, Bruce talks about the subtle hands. We've trained with other students of Hung Xiang, and it's that, that ability to articulate the hands is a big part of his thing, and it's that sort of speed at touch, right? Like, not the speed that it takes you to get from, your shoulder to their hand, but the speed that it takes from after you touch their hand to change that angle just a tiny little bit so that their punch misses you, or that you now have an angle to hit them, And I think that was, it's a particular thing, especially when you're a big guy, it's easier to stand there and kind of just wiggle around, and, they can't hit you in any way that's going to hurt you. So you just can kind of hang out and move back and forth. And both Wang Shujing and Heng Yixiang had that. It's like trying to hit a jellyfish or something. It's just going to wiggle out the way when you try to hit it. And I think a lot of that comes from that ability to access your body, and move things independently, which essentially is, the purpose of all the standing stuff, is just to get, that awareness in your body. I mean, one of the things about Bruce is he can do some freaky stuff with his body. He can move the plates of his skull and, all this stuff. And, all of that stuff is just an illustration of how well he can feel what's inside of his body. Because if you can feel something, you can move it, right? And so whether you're feeling the very subtle things that are happening in your hand against someone else's forearm, or you're feeling the things in your body and, moving because of the way your arm is, it's all essentially the same skill. It's awareness and a control of your body.
So moving to the next, to sort of wrap up our discussion of Heng Yixiang here. Heng was no schoolboy. He was a hardened, earthy boxer. He was no great historical source, and some of his ideas were curious, but he was an unalloyed fighter. His reputation among boxers was high, secured through many street battles from which he had emerged unscathed. And these fights were rough affairs, swords often being employed. At least 2 young boxers I knew and practiced with died in such fights, but Heng survived, and grandly. He was so formidable that he often was asked to referee these battles. Heng loved fighting, and like Dempsey in his skirmishes, he was hard put to pull his punches. He once knocked me senseless with a chop to the base of the skull, and often shook my entire frame with broken power punches.
Yeah, I know that one.
That shot to the back of the skull is a familiar one, and that says it all about the type of martial artists that were practicing in Taiwan back in the days of the 1950s and 60s.
It's just, well, again, and it speaks to that thing about it may not look good, but it works well, right? I mean, he may not be pretty and jumping around and doing fancy movements, but when he hits you, you fall down unconscious.
Right. Yeah, forms, beauty weren't really the specialty. Stuff like Rosho, standing, those give you the sort of rock solid basis for 2-person activities such as sparring.
Yeah.
And so the final piece here for Master Heng is the statement: the mind and chi were more important than the body, Heng said. That's pretty profound.
It's pretty right there with what we've been taught. I mean,
So, instead of necessarily doing push-ups or hitting a punching bag, although you could do those things too, developing the mind and chi is more important.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe those standing practices and the qigong that we're talking about form the basis for these type of martial arts, is the impression I'm getting.
I think that's the sort of one of those common threads again with all these guys. It was like that was if it wasn't useful, it didn't matter. Why do it? You had to have some sort of practical, pragmatic application. So all the chi stuff was very much, there as an adjunct to the martial arts. It wasn't, it didn't make it. It wasn't like you could do it just chi. That the idea that just standing in a room by yourself for 20 years, you're going to learn how to fight. No, you might get, you might learn how to move chi. But you might, it's a very different thing to move your chi or to move power, or to move someone else, So it's like those things are, but they are, essentially come from the same source.
All right, returning to opening the energy gates of your body, we're looking at the principles behind the dissolving process. So he's talking here about the ancient Taoists and how our universe is composed of different types of energies. Taoist Qigong follows the basic alchemical methodology of raising slow, condensed energetic vibrations to more subtle, faster, and expansive vibrations. And in this way, you learn to create physical health, emotional well-being, psychic clarity, and ultimately developing your spirit and even the Tao itself. And this recalls to me the idea of the 8 different energy bodies that is often taught in relation to this Taoist Qigong.
Right.
The first
The
body
idea.
is the physical body, and the second body is the energy body that we've been talking about here in opening the energy gates.
Right. So the ones that deal with Qigong, right, or Neigong as a health practice are the first 2 and a little bit of the third, right? So the third being your emotional body, right? That, making your body feel good improves your emotional state, but that's not the same as working with the higher emotions, like, the stuff, the deeper stuff, why you feel the way you do, essentially. So, and then you get into the higher levels from that are more what you commonly refer to as spiritual practices, right? Like things that have to do with mental abilities, psychic abilities, that sort of stuff.
And beyond that, there's the bodies of karma, the bodies of your individual nature, and finally the body of the Tao itself, if you want to go all through all the 8
right,
bodies.
So the first 3 have to do with your physical body. The second 3 are kind of like your abilities that your mind can take care of, and the last ones are things that go beyond the physical body, right? That they go beyond. They're the stuff that takes you, quote unquote, into enlightenment, right? What makes you you, and what makes you part of the collective unconscious, or whatever you want to call it, that this thing that we're all connected to, right?
He calls it the nature of the universe, the Tao.
And that's what, that's the Taoists have their word for it. And, everybody else some people call it God. It's just that thing that is out there that when you seem to tap into it, you get information from somewhere, And I think Taoists I've always used that as like they use a little bit of it, but it's not like that's the whole goal. At least in terms of Taoist Qigong, it's not the whole goal, right? So like there are elements of accessing these bodies that are useful in terms of Qigong, and then there are elements of it that, while nice for the rest of you, isn't really going to help you, or me not hurt, or something like, unless that thing is attached to some emotional trauma. It often is.
Right. And that brings up the idea that by affecting one of the 8 bodies, it has a ripple effect through the others. So if you work on your physical body, it may affect your energy body, which in turn has an effect on your emotional body, and so on.
Yeah, but there are like techniques for the, specific techniques work better for other things, right? So energy gates is not it's the most efficient way to work on the first 2. It's the not the most efficient way to work on some of the higher ones, right? So the things you do when you do moving Qigong are, like I said, primarily those first 3 bodies, and then beyond that, most of it's either done sitting or doing some sort of very simple thing like walking, or where your physical body is almost it's there, but it's not the focus. Where in the beginning it's the focus, right? It's the whole thing is about getting your chi of your body to and that's where I think when you talk about chi, you have to talk about what kind, right? So energy gates works with the chi of your body, and the chi around your body, and a little bit of the chi in your emotions, but beyond that, it's like there are better practices for that. It's
right.
a good.
So each of the practices, each practice influences the others, but each practice has a specific sphere of activity where it's most efficient and most useful.
Right. So, when he says the thing about, so he says it's a preparation for Taoist internal alchemy, right? Taoist internal alchemy is the stuff that's meditation and beyond, if you will. That's the stuff that deals with the other practices. So,
So that's going into the psychic, the
right.
karmic, those levels.
And if you want to do those things, this could become a container for it. It's just, not its original intent, if you will.
That makes sense to me.
It's like Bagua. Bagua can be a meditative practice. It can also just be a martial practice. What the intent you put into it is also, a big part of what the thing becomes. You could do energy gates like a martial art, You watch some of those old videos of Bruce when he does the swings, it's like, that looks like, so he's, looks like hitting something.
Right. He's slapping hard.
Yeah. It's like, ow, that would hurt if you got in the way of those arms, it would not be, good for you.
Whereas, as it's generally taught with a little softer edge to it so that you can apply it towards your more health practice or meditative practice.
Yeah, well,
but the seed is still there. The seed of the martial side is definitely still within it.
Right. I mean, I think that one of the things that's shifted over time is, the emphasis on martial arts has become less emphasized, So when I first started with Bruce, it was, he would say things about how this is a martial tradition, and now it's less of that. So, but all of these guys that we're talking about were all both, very good at martial arts and very good at healing in some way or another,
Definitely.
So, I think that's that piece of it is, goes a little deeper than that, So whether that healing was done hands-on or was done through meditation or was done through, Qigong, is still healing,
There's always a healing aspect, a medical aspect of each of these martial arts practices.
Right. Well, it's that thing of it can be, it can be a martial practice, can be a health practice, and it can be a spiritual practice. And that's essentially going through those bodies, right? I mean, martial practices is essentially something you do with your body, right? Your physical body, where, health practice is something you do with the energy that runs through your body.
And then those meditative practices affect the mind and the emotion to begin with.
Right. Those go into the mind and other, psychic stuff.
And so wrapping up this chapter on energy gates, he ends by saying, just be gentle with yourself. Don't force your chi. If you have a block you can't dissolve, you just go on around, let it go, and just keep working with the rest of your body. Don't get stuck on anything feeling like you have to achieve it before you can move on. And I think there's a dichotomy in the training, because on one level, you don't want to move on to the next thing until you've mastered one thing. But on the other hand, you can't get stuck in one spot forever. You've got to sort of do as much as you can and then move on to the next thing, which will kind of help you go back later and finish up what you did previously. So there's a balance there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like you have to put effort into it, but you don't want to push yourself, and you want to focus on things, but you don't want to get stuck there, right? So addressing an issue is fine, but making that, whether or not you complete that one thing, the sort of the parameter for whether or not you move beyond that, it gets you into trouble, because then you're putting all this like pressure on yourself, like I got to do this or I can't go further. And two, it's like that thing may not be attached to something that to a level that you're at yet. So you may have to go several layers down before you can even, tap into that thing.
So that's that sense of just finding your own way, doing it your own pace. Don't let other people's expectations or requirements drive you. You've got to do it pretty organically, and each person has their own sort of path to finding this.
Right. I mean, and don't let your own things get in the way. I mean, that's also part of it. Your own expectations and stuff like that.
I think that's it.
Okay, that's good for now. Talk to you soon.
All right, bro. Talk to you later.
Bye. Hey everyone, this is Isaac again. Thanks for listening. Just a reminder to like and subscribe and check us out on Patreon. Thanks. Take care. Bye.